Welcome to Legal Basics with Cyra Law Global, and my name is Tian. We're still in the Children Law series, and today we're going to discuss a very important and a topic that we don't know much about, which is the adoption of children. And I'm joined with a very special guest who is one of my mentors who mentors me from afar, and I will let her introduce herself.
My name is Leah Kigwatha, and I'm an advocate. I run a law firm here in Nairobi called Kigwatha and Company Advocates. Thanks for having me, Sian.
Hi, you're most welcome. No, I'm honored that you're here. So, Leah, please explain to us, what is adoption?
Adoption is the cutting off of the biological parent's rights and then over a child, and then giving those rights to the adoptive parent, who then now becomes the legal parent of the child.
Mm-hmm. What kind of child can get adopted?
The law requires that for a child to be adopted, they have to be more than 6 weeks old. And the kind of children who get adopted usually will be either children who have been abandoned. So when a child has been abandoned and they've been found, they've been rescued, they've been taken to a children's home, that's the first kind of adoption that you usually see. And there are many kinds of abandonments. There is a harsh abandonment where you hear a child was found in a dustbin, a child was found on the road. That's harsh abandonment. The other type of abandonment that happens is that, sometimes women have, somebody has a baby and they walk out of the hospital. That's considered to be a gentler type of abandonment. So usually it will be babies who are abandoned. And then there are also babies who are given up for adoption, because the law allows you, if you're having a crisis pregnancy and you can't keep the child, to speak to an adoption society, and the adoption society will take the child when you deliver, assist you in giving consent, or arrange for counseling before delivery, and then at the delivery of the child, they will take the child and find a safe space for the child to stay in, usually at a children's home or a rescue center, and then now they make arrangements for the adoption of the child. So usually it is either a child who's abandoned or a child who has been given up for adoption. Then, of course, in kinship adoptions, people adopt children when they are families. So you lose your sister, you lose your brother, you lose a relative, a cousin, and maybe that person, there's nobody to take care of that child. Or what I see often is that children are left with grandparents. Then grandparents are aging and are unable to take care of this child. And then a member of the family can arrange to adopt the child, bring them into their family, legalize that process, and then they become the parents of the child. So that's called kinship adoption. Okay. So those are the three types of children who usually get adopted. The law is you can't start the adoption until the child is 6 weeks old. And if somebody gives up their child for adoption, they have up to 6 weeks after the adoption of the child, after the birth of the child, to come back and change their mind. Even after that, if the child has not been placed, even after their 6 weeks, they can come back for the child.
Oh, and say, I
changed my mind. Yes. But then if an adoption case has already started in court, you'd have to ask the court for permission to take back the child, and the court will listen to both sides and decide what's in the best interest of the child.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there a person who is qualified or not qualified to adopt a child in Kenya?
So you can adopt. You have to be over 25 years old and under 65 years old, unless you're related to the child. So between 25 and 65, you have to be 21 years older than the child. So you can't be 25 and you're adopting a 15-year-old, except in very exceptional circumstances. For example, if you're a relative of the child. Okay. If you're 30 years old and you have a 15-year-old niece that you think you should take into your care, you would have to make a case for it. But yeah, that case can be made, and if it's in the best interest of the child, the adoption will be allowed. So basically, you have to be between 25 and 65 and 21 years older than the child. And what else? Now, if you are a single man, used to be able to adopt boys,
Yeah.
but the law has changed now, and single men can only adopt their relatives. That's what the Children Act says.
Yes.
The High Court, however, recently made an exception in a case where a couple had started the adoption of a child, and then the adoptive mom passed.
Okay.
And so, now the law, now you faced with a new law.
Yeah.
The question is, what's in the best interest of this
the
child?
child.
Can you now say that the child should be returned to the children's home because the adoptive mom has passed and he's not related to the adoptive, there's no relationship yet legally. And so the High Court said, no, that would be ridiculous. And so in the best interest of the child stayed in the family. But basically, if you look at the way the act is written now, the new act in 2022, it says single men can only adopt boys. And I think can only adopt their relatives.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be challenged. I don't think that's going to really survive.
What do you think
very
is the
long.
rationale, though?
I think, of course, always the rationale is the protection of children.
Yes.
Is the protection of children. So in the past, it used to be the single men can adopt boys. And single women could only adopt girls if there are exceptional circumstances. Unless could only adopt boys if there are exceptional circumstances, but they could adopt a girl. So the whole ethos of the Children Act, of course, is to protect children. Now, let me say there were not very many single men coming forward
adopt
boys, even when they had that option.
Okay.
But I feel bad for children because that option has been removed, because the few who were willing and able and were assessed and found fit who could take boys in now have been stopped. And it's a little bit of a crisis for boys because there are more boys abandoned than girls.
Oh.
Yes, I think it's something to do with our culture and the thought that if you have a boy, if you're a single lady and you have a boy, there is a likelihood you won't get, your chances of getting married.
Oh,
apparently, unless
Africa.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but that's what I've heard. And then
come and take land.
Yeah, and also when girls are also entitled to land, but then also there's also the perception that, I don't know what this perception is, but even married couples who can adopt boys, when given a choice, they still want a girl. So there is actually a crisis for boys because there are more boys in children's homes, and that crisis has been there for quite some time. And but men want coming forth, I guess, because they don't have a biological clock. But I still feel bad that the option to adopt a boy for single men has been removed. But on the other hand, it used to be that a single woman could only adopt a boy with special circumstances.
Yes.
But that has been removed. So now, as a single woman, you can either adopt a boy or a girl, and you don't need to prove special circumstances. And there were many single women adopting girls. There were many single women adopting a girl and then adopting a boy. So it's going to be interesting to see how the law affects the welfare of children who are in institutions as we go, as the law ages. Let's see whether the law ages well.
So now for the age minimum and maximum 25, 65, and the 21 year age gap, what is the rationale for that?
I think the rationale is to approximate a biological parent situation.
Okay.
I think that's the idea behind it. You're trying to approximate what would happen with a biological family. Yeah, so that for the protection of the child. So their energy levels, and things like that. You're trying to approximate a biological family as much as you can under the law.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So let's say I'm Sian, I want to adopt a child. Where would I start?
Your first stop, and I need to tell everyone this, is an adoption society. Look for an adoption society. Speak to the children's office next to you, and they'll send you to an adoption society, a registered adoption society near you. Please don't start at the children's home. fall in love with a child and then say you want to take them home to adopt them. Because sometimes the children's home may place them in your hands, but you don't know their history. You don't know whether their investigations on that child are complete and they are really adoptable. You don't know whether they have a mom in remand who's about to come back for them. You don't know their history. So start with an adoption society so that you can be placed with a child who is free for adoption, who's certified free for adoption. And also because you need to be assessed. You might take in a child and then when you're assessed, you're not fit. Say you take in a child, maybe there's an age issue. There could be issues. So the first step is to talk to an adoption society. The role of the adoption society is to assess you and make a finding about your fitness to adopt, and then place you with a child who is free for adoption. Yeah, who is free for adoption. And now under the Act 22, under the Children Act 2022, children are declared free for adoption by the Council for Children's Services.
Oh.
Yes, so adoption societies will arrange, but it is the Council for Children's Services, the National Council for Children's Services, that declares children free for adoption.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why you must, so that you're not placed with a child who's not been declared free for adoption.
Okay.
But the National Council for Children's Services. So the first stop is to go to an adoption society, even if you're adopting a child in the family. Whenever somebody calls me and says they're adopting a child in their family, and what's the process? I usually ask them, are you seated? Are you sitting down? Because you would think it's a walk in the park.
I'm about to disappoint you.
Yeah, this is my niece. Even this is my spouse's child.
Yeah.
My spouse came into the marriage with a child. We want to make this child equal with our other children. Maybe we've got a big job, a job abroad, and we want to relocate, and the visa won't be granted because the child is not I'm not on the child's birth certificate. So the first question I ask is, are you seated? Because the process is the same. You still need to be assessed and found fit to adopt, and the child needs to be declared free for adoption.
Okay.
So that the spouse, your cousin who's giving up the child that maybe you've lived with forever, has to give consent. Was their intention to give up the child legally and give up all their rights, to terminate those rights? Or were they giving you the child to just raise for a time and give the child back? So all those processes have to be done. So even within a family situation, the first stop is a registered adoption society.
In fact, the definition at the beginning is very important because I feel like most people do not think that when you give up your child for adoption, you completely cease being the parent of that child.
Yeah.
I've seen a young girl who was trying to give her children to be adopted by her auntie who lives in the States, so that they can go to the States. But she did not understand that if she adopts these children, then they're no longer yours. You will no longer be their mother legally.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. But now after the adoption society, there's a court process.
There's a court process. So what the adoption society does is that it places you with a child who has been declared free for adoption, and then you must stay with the child for 3 months before you can approach the court.
In your home?
Yes, in your home. Bond with the child, let it see how the child is integrating into your family, and then you can now start the court process.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know there's a moratorium now on foreign adoptions, but it's not in the Act. So it's likely to be lifted and
it's actually in the Act. It's in the Act. So we don't know what to do about it because the Act defines foreign adoptions. It talks about foreign adoptions and puts in place modalities for doing foreign adoption.
Yes.
But then it says at the end of the Act, in the transition of provisions, that the moratorium that was declared in 2014 is still in force, remains in force.
Okay.
Yeah. So
how would that be lifted now that it's in the Act?
I think it will be lifted through judgment law. I think it's the only way.
To lift a moratorium that
To
has been quoted in an act.
I mean, I think, you see, I think arguments can be made, and courts can say it's irrational, it doesn't make sense, the act needs to be amended, or it needs to cease to be applied. You know that there are sometimes you have an act, and it has a provision that has been declared unconstitutional or illegal, and therefore it sits there and nobody applies it because the court has already talked about its legality. So I think the moratorium will cease to apply through judgment laws if people take matters to court. But the issue is, adoption societies would have to place a foreigner with a child. Adoption societies get their licenses renewed every year.
Yes.
Which adoption society? The question is, which adoption society will want to risk their license? Will there? But recently a foreign adoption was granted in the High Court at Machakos, and the special circumstances given, I think, were the medical needs of the child, the exceptional circumstances relating to the best interest of the child. So I think it will be on case by case, on a case by case basis. But I keep asking, which society
is willing to risk?
Because government policy is for us not to have inter-country adoptions. And then an interesting thing also under the new act, it says that a foreign adopter has to be related to the child.
Yes,
that's what it says. And then it classifies Kenyans living abroad as foreign adopters.
Yeah,
I mean, there is going to be a lot of litigation around this new act. So very new, interesting provisions that on adoption that we have to explore and place before the court
and test. Now, the part where the prospective adoptive parent has to live with the child for 3 months before they can be granted these orders. Sometimes a person is adopting a child who's not even based in their town. Doesn't that inconvenience the child? Does it have to be an aggregate of 3 months, or it has to be a continuous 3 months?
You see, the child is in your home. They are placed with you, and the 3 months is a minimum as opposed to a maximum.
Okay.
So you're living with them for those 3 months. You're living with them. And they're living in your house. They're really basically a child in your household. And during those 3 months, the adoption society is doing monthly visits or requiring you to visit its offices with the child to monitor the progress of the child, the progress of bonding. So how is the child fitting into the family? So those 3 months, and there are minimum. Sometimes people request to have them added before they go to court. But then also sometimes if it takes too long, it's usually considered a red flag. If you've had a child for a year, 18 months, and you're still looking reluctant, it's considered a bit of a red flag, because if you don't want to commit to them by doing the legal process, what does that mean? Is the child safe? Are you feeling non-committal to this child? So it's a tricky balance. The 3 months is a minimum. It can be added to 6, 7, 8 months. But then the longer you stay with the child and you're not committing to the child, raises questions by doing the legal process, raises questions. And it's also a bit tricky because it means the child is becoming comfortable.
Yes.
They are stabilizing in your home. And if you're not doing the legal process,
you're keeping the child in
planning to return them. And what does that look like for the child who has had a family to be returned to an institution? Because the whole ethos of adoption is the idea, the concept, the notion, the international principle that the best place for a child to grow up in is in a family, not in an institution.
Okay. Now, at the tail end of the court process, what do prospective adoptive parents expect, and what changes at that point?
So at the end of the court process, the court, if it's successful, the court allows you to adopt the child. And you become the legal parent of that child. You have all the responsibilities and rights of a parent. And then, so the court will issue a court order. The court order usually has directions for the Registrar General to register that adoption. And so when you take the court order to the Registrar General, they register the adoption and issue something called an adoption certificate. And then once you get the adoption certificate, you can apply for a post-adoption birth certificate, which removes the child's original parents and puts you as the adopter or adopters on the birth certificate. So that's optional. It's not even in the act per se. It's judgment law again.
Yeah.
It's a very celebrated case in the adoption community because it removes for a long time. In fact, I think now people take it for granted.
Yeah.
We finish the adoption and we are so happy. And then, parents say, when am I getting the birth certificate?
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you know that we didn't have this birth certificate? This is a recent thing.
Yeah.
For many years, what you had was an adoption certificate.
And that was it.
Yeah, that was it. So you go to open a bank account, you ask for a birth certificate, you produce an adoption certificate,
Different
you have to explain. Schools, especially, in fact, especially, regular Kenyan schools, you go, you tell them you don't have a birth certificate, it becomes a big
they ask you,
and
who is
scandal.
this person?
Exactly.
It's
No,
not
they
your
can
name.
see you, it's your name.
Yeah.
On the adoption certificate, it's your name, of course.
But on the birth, it's
But
not.
yeah, you see, you may not have a birth certificate, or even if you do, you don't want to present a birth certificate with another parent's name.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean that case, that decision by Justice Lanaola when he was in the High Court is a very celebrated decision. It's you can decide whether to take your birth certificate or not. I always tell people that everybody wants. No, everybody wants. Everybody wants the birth certificate, and because it removes, and that was the thinking behind the case. That was the rationale. Is that
now you're a full parent.
Yeah, and then it removes the stigma of having to explain to every place you go that you adopted this child, so that they're forever carrying this is the adopted child's label, while the child is now in the family. Let them have the same documentation as the other children.
All right.
Yeah. It's on a need to know basis though, because if you don't, people think this is an opportunity to go fake a birth certificate. When you apply for a passport, they'll know. Yes. So when you go for a passport, that's another thing. And we really need to speak to the Department of Immigration. When you apply for a passport using your post-adoption birth certificate, please carry also your adoption order and your adoption certificate, because they know. Yes, because it is it's all this registration is under
different.
It's in the Interior, the Ministry for Interior Affairs, I think. So they know within their records. So if you present that birth certificate and you don't present your adoption certificate and your adoption order, they'll ask you for those documents. So everywhere else, nobody's asking. But when you go for your passport, to avoid heartache, carry your adoption documents. Yeah.
Oh,
So the earlier you get the passport, maybe the better.
Kenyans will buy a plot. The moment they get the title, they discard all other papers. I think for adoption, it's the same way.
Yeah.
Once you have the baby and the birth certificate, you just discard the papers. Viewers, remember to keep the adoption order. The original, right?
Adoption certificate. Yeah, the original. Yeah, because immigration is going to ask for it.
Okay. Just one last question. I know just the way you mentioned that very few men would present themselves to be adoptive parents. Statistically, yes. I've seen a situation where a married couple adopts children and then the marriage breaks down and the man says, hey, I wanted a family, but now that we're no longer together, I don't want those children. Is adoption reversible?
No, it's not. If you break up, the law will take the same course as for your biological children. You will both have parental responsibility. Parental responsibility is joint and equal. So you'll have to decide who is going to live with the child. The person who's not living with the child, when are they going to be able to have parenting time with the child? How are the child's needs going to be taken care of? and how they're going to be split between the parents is the same as biological parents.
Okay.
So it's not reversible. Although the new act has provisions for appeal and for review of the orders, adoptive parents are very unhappy about that. But everything, remember, is in the best interest of the child. And so, but it's rare. It's very rare that somebody tries to reverse it. And you can't reverse it on the basis of a breakup. You're not allowed to break up with the child.
I'm no longer with the mother.
You're not allowed to break up with the child. You can break up with the mother, but you know, you're not allowed to break up with the child.
Okay, sorry, that was the second last question. The last question is on inheritance rights of adopted children. But just before I get there, I just want to give it a little twist because we've seen some African homes where children have been considered adopted without having gone through the adoption process, and they have been considered adopted children. So and eventually they get to have inheritance rights like the others. I know that can be explained in a whole day, but maybe just to make very quick comments about that, how that happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me say that when you look at the Law of Succession Act, there are levels of who has the right to inherit.
Yes.
So biological children take a first level. They have a right. They don't have to prove that they were depending on the deceased person. Yeah. They don't have to prove dependency. So when you adopt a child legally, when you go through the legal process and you adopt a child legally, your child gets to that first level. They have a right to inherit as of right. Now, when you take a child into the family and you don't adopt them, so they just legally, you just throw the word adoption around.
Going to their details.
Yeah, you adopt my child formally as our grandparents.
Yes.
And our parents did. When you do that, you're putting that child in the level of a dependent.
Okay.
So they are third or fourth row in terms of priority, and they have to prove dependency because a child brought in by the deceased person is considered to can be a dependent once they prove dependency.
Okay.
So my plea to you is, if you have taken in a child, if you want them to have equal rights with your children, which would be in their best interest with their biological children, which is in their best interest, do the legal adoption process. Then there'll be first row. There'll be no argument, no discussion about whether they are your child or not. Now, if you don't do the legal adoption process and you stay in this informal situation, and your kids are in their 30s and their 40s, and sibling rivalry has picked up, then you're passing on in your 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
this child can actually be thrown out, because the question is, do they have the energy to fight their siblings? You know,
the real sibling. The real sibling.
No,
biological sibling.
Do they have the energy to fight the family they grew up in?
Yeah.
It's a very sad situation.
Yeah.
I actually encountered it once. A lady who I didn't even know these were not her biological siblings. She grew up in her aunties, with her auntie's family. These were her sisters and brothers, and and they were, in fact, when you meet them, they are sisters and brothers, because she went in there when she was when I think she was maybe 5 years old, and then many years later, so she was raised with them. So in their 40s and 50s, when their parents pass on, and they're doing the succession of a very vast estate, they don't want to include her, and she's asking, so am I not your sister? Yeah, I'm not. How do I now go forward?
Yeah.
When from when I was 5-6 years old,
I was part of your.
In the last 40 years, you've been my sister. So now I'm not your sister.
Yeah.
And human nature. It's human nature. Please protect this child from the nature of humans and from the boundaries of adult life.
Yeah.
And just the way life goes.
Through
the formal adoption, do the legal adoption, go to court, and then there'll be no question about it. They don't have to prove dependence. Because imagine starting to prove that you are depending. Yeah, of course you're no longer depending on them. So it's I think it's important.
Okay.
So I think the point is, you can be considered, that child can be considered a child brought in, but they have to prove dependence. So they don't have the same priority as a biological child or a child who has gone through the legal adoption process.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our broadcast. I have learned so much. So I'm sure the viewer has as well. So where the viewers that want to contact you, how can they contact you?
Maybe we'll put a banner with the law firm address and the law firm and the law firm email. But just look us up. kigwathalegal.com is our website. On LinkedIn we are Kigwatha and Company Advocates, and on Facebook Kigwatha Legal.
Okay.
Look us up and let's talk.
Yeah, please adopt children, and she's the best in the business.
Are you allowed to say that?
Oh yes, no,
You need to
please
cut
don't
this
come
out.
for me.
Don't come for us.
Do not come for me. Is this advertising? Okay.
I did say it, so I'm safe.
To somebody else. It was like a referral. Okay, brings us to the end of our broadcast. Before we close, we would like to say thanks to Cradle Foundation for facilitating the shooting of this series, and to Mashiri Frames, who are our videography crew. And if you have any questions for us, or compliments or suggestions, please write to us at info@smlawafrica.com. That's info@smlawafrica.com. You can also write to us through our old Gmail address, which is cyrolawglobal@gmail.com. Take care of your families. Bye-bye.